Okay, so let's just get into the discussion about health coach authoritarianism. And Sheng will be the first to go. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sheng. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Communication at Hong Kong Baptist University and a center associate at the Center for Chinese Studies at University of Michigan. And it's a great pleasure for me to be presenting my work in progress entitled Hold On to the Green Horse on Algorithmic Non-Resistance, or How to Live with Automated Social Sorting in China in the COVID era. And I will come back to this mythic symbol of a green horse in just a minute. So we already had a few presentations in the last panel that sort of look at the discourses, imaginaries, and folk theories around ADM technology. So my presentation very much speak to those presentations on different levels. Including Guxing's paper on discourses, legal discourses around facial recognition technology in China. Although we vividly remember public resistance against the zero COVID policy implemented by the state, in recent anti-lockdown protests, we should not lose sight of its counterpoint, which is a complex ethos of non-resistance toward algorithmic governance that was prevalent during the zero COVID era, which would outlive those apps that sort of tracked people's health status and their whereabouts. And it manifested itself in the rich popular discourses around the health coach system, which was a prevalent form of ADM technology during the COVID era. But so I argue that to examine the health code as a socio-technical ensemble entails not only studies of how it is designed, implemented, or used, and how it is officially framed and promoted, but also how it is perceived, imagined, and felt by the public. And by looking closely at people's discursive practices, especially on social media, I attend to the heterogeneity of grassroots agency that does not always translate into like resistance. And the broader sociocultural climate in which ADM technology operates, evolves, or is being stabilized. And I think that also sort of confirms Haijin's earlier comment on how some people actually welcome or introduce facial recognition technology or other security oriented surveillance into their homes. Since the launch of the health code apps, there has been an outpouring of creative posts on social media platforms revolving around the keyword green code, which is a color code that was assigned to people who were seen as non-COVID affected or rated as non-COVID affected, who were allowed to move around. And many posts associate the green code with this homophone in Chinese, green horse, because they were both called Lü Ma. And this mythic symbol of the green horse was brought to life or remediated in an array of semiotic and material forms, from food items and accessories to paintings and sculptures in public spaces and statues. And so through an inductive and qualitative approach, this paper analyzes a sample of multimodal posts with the keyword green code or its homophone green horse on one of the most popular Chinese platforms, Xiaohongshu. Due to the platform's enhanced protection against third-party crawlers, within the help of an RA, I had to manually collect those posts on a smartphone using the platform's trending sorting function to rank search results according to engagement metrics. And the top 300 posts in each category, like either with the keyword green code or green horse, were analyzed. Drawing on constant comparative method, I identified recurring content categories, themes, and patterns of the sample material. And based on the conceptual framework of this article, 3 prevalent forms of discursive practices were or kind of summarize, and I'm going to briefly summarize them. That is strategic maintenance, aesthetic romanticization, and casual superstition. So first, a large proportion of posts about the health code are actually self-help guides for situations when one's color code turns yellow or red, even though the individual in question is not infected. So you can see some examples here. There are posts that tells people how to navigate situations like that, and with words like, oh, getting a green code is actually very simple, hassle-free, and within half an hour you can apply for a green code, and that is the Chinese efficiency, something like that. Or tutorials on how to troubleshoot when like the algorithm system went down or like encounter some issues or errors. And along the same line, many posts also target returning expats, Chinese expats, by guiding them through the policies of international travel and the procedures of applying for a green code upon the return. So there are some screenshots here, and these users and corporate accounts sometimes fill people in on the know-how of using or troubleshooting the health code when official information is either lacking or hard to come by. And in this way, a considerable amount of labor entailed by the maintenance and repair of the algorithmic system is delegated to the users themselves. And such acts of strategic maintenance focuses public attention on getting or keeping the green code as an instrumental goal, overshadowing the politics around it. And the second kind of practice, which was pretty prevalent, is that in many posts, the green code becomes a romanticized and mythologized symbol represented in aesthetic and artistic forms. In the zero COVID era, green suddenly becomes a trendy and auspicious color. Stylized images of a green horse were incorporated into a dazzling array of material and commodity forms, ranging from giant inflatable installation arts, like the one that I showed on the very first slide, and statues and landscaping, to smaller items such as plush toys, puzzles, puzzling figurines, paintings, and paper art, tote bags, t-shirts, sweaters, purse charms, keychains, masks, desserts, and beverages, and the list goes on and on. Brands, vendors, marketers, and artists work together to cash in on the green horse fad, incorporating the symbol into their marketing stunts and products. And in numerous cities such as Wuhan, Chengdu, and Xi'an, giant inflatable models of an iconic green horse were installed in public squares before shopping malls, and people would share those exhibitions and installation arts on this platform and take photos with them and share them joyfully on social media, on Xiaohongshu. And these pieces carry rich sociocultural meanings and express people's wishes and longings for the end of the pandemic. And when such wishes and longings are invested in the opaque and mystified algorithmic power, they become a sort of casual superstition. So here are some examples. So one digital poster, for example, resembles a Chinese New Year picture, a form of folk art originally meant to dispel evil spirits. And in the picture, for example, the third one, features a galloping green horse flanked by a couplet that reads, "Green horse held in hand, pandemic kept at bay." And the horizontal scroll says, "Green horse every day." And that's my translation. And in another digital painting, an animated caricature of Zhonghui, which is a vanquisher of equal beings in Chinese mythology, was wearing a mask and a green coat print shirt, riding a green horse while wielding a sword, and the caption reads, "The pandemic dissipates." And herein lies a very subtle slippage of signification. The green code, which is supposed to function as a proxy for health, is taken or mistaken as a purveyor of or defender of health. And in the second image, actually, the green code was made into a physical talisman. And there are many posts that come with a variety of blessing words. The green codes thus become a talisman in physical and metaphoric and symbolic terms. Of course, these apparently superstitious expressions are mixed with a hint of playfulness and lightheartedness, yet some also evince a type of reverence for the mighty algorithmic power in the sense they betray the user's sense of powerlessness and incomprehension towards the opacity and uncertainty around the workings of the color codes. And it sort of speaks to an emerging trend in which people imagine algorithms as somewhat divine or sublime. So it becomes powerful not only due to the increasing consecration of algorithmic rationality, but also to the state's growing delegation of governing power to ADM technologies. So the three kind of practices that I sort of distilled, I think reveal an assortment of layered and ambivalent emotional responses that directly or indirectly, consciously or unconsciously countenance the expansion of algorithmic power, what I call algorithmic non-resistance. And I utilize this term to capture responses that fit uneasily into such often discussed tendencies in critical data studies, such as digital resignation or digital or algorithmic resistance. Public attention in this case is shifted away from the contentious politics around ADM technology. And in particular, I want to highlight a few prevalent emotional reactions that fall into this category, which I summarize them as proactive endorsement, pragmatic complicity, and convivial nonchalance. And they are all sort of reflected in the examples that I showed you. So, for example, proactive endorsement is pronounced in cheerleading posts that boost the public morale for the battle against COVID, and those that laud the implementation of the health code, and they embrace the ways in which the health code is officially intended to be utilized. And pragmatic complicity is most notable in tutorial and experience sharing posts that publicize solutions to acquiring, maintaining, or gaining a green code. And such attempts of strategic maintenance focus people's attention to the mechanics and logistics associated with the use of health code apps. And last but not least, convivial nonchalance is probably the most salient response of such brand-driven platforms such as Xiaohongshu, as exemplified by posts that promote the health code related symbols as commoditized that evoke a sense of pleasure. And I think such an ambiance of algorithmic non-resistance is quietly cultivated by a host of private actors on this highly commercialized platform, such as travel agencies, merchants, marketers, influencers, who inadvertently or intentionally short up a sociocultural climate conducive to the state's implementation of the health code projects. And against this backdrop of algorithmic non-resistance, being healthy is really besides the point. Securing an algorithmic proxy for health is the key, because merely being healthy without having the green code does not get one anywhere. But having the green code, irrespective of one's actual health status, opens every door. And through these practices, it arguably becomes even more difficult to unmask how power is invested in algorithms and to separate algorithms from the very effects, promises, and possibilities that they generate. And to briefly summarize, the main goal of this article is to contribute to the theorization of the complicated and constantly changing dynamics of human algorithm relations and the growing body of work on algorithmic imaginaries by engaging closely with ordinary people's discourses, experiences, and feelings in China. And hopefully it will stimulate a global reckoning of the potential and problems of ADM technologies in societal governance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We'll go straight to Jesper. We'll take question and comments at the end. Yes.
Good. Thank you very much. So this will be very much in continuation of Sheng's, though I think Sheng is further in the process of actually making them into an article. So that will also show. Yeah. So what the aim of what we're trying to make is sort of more a reflection of what the health code, whether or not it was really a groundbreaking change in the whole way that decision making takes place in China. Surely it introduced some new methods, but as Sheng also showed, there are also various workarounds about how you make it not count. So what we're looking at in the paper are examples of what you do when something happens to your health code and it doesn't do as anyone would have expected it to do. So what is it you do? We start with some everyday cases, and then we move on to studying this big banking scandal in Henan where health codes were changing. So that's sort of what this is about. So we're looking at how this system of automated decision making is introduced by the health code and how it's linked to other systems, because by trying to see what kind of links there might be, you might also be able to assess to what extent is this really something that will move into other arenas than simply governing health code, which of course was governing basically, sorry, this is where I need to change it, governing the entire life of people during COVID-19, but now it governs much less so. So what will happen? I mean, will any of these things continue? Yeah, so what the health code is it's, as I think most of you know, it's supposed to be that sort of based on where you are, it will assess the risk of infection for each individual. We talked a lot about this already. And it can use different sorts of elements to see what it is. Some people call it sort of an example of deterritorialization, because it sort of means that it doesn't matter to the code what sort of administrative boundaries you have. It's at least not supposed to do that. It's sort of the relations and where you are when that's supposed to be decisive, but still space still plays a quite big role, because it is about regulating how you can get around, and there are places that if you went there, then you can't go anywhere. And the whole question sort of leads up to, would this logic of sort of decoupling the sort of finely territorialized bureaucratic Chinese state from sort of other means of governance, would that be something that you would see happening more or less? How was it actually? That is sort of what we're looking at. And we are trying to use, this is something we need to work a little bit more on, Marianne Foucault's concept of ordinal citizenship in this analysis, because she argues that IT systems introduce another kind of citizenship, where it's really more about performing, and like in this case, where you are when, than what your sort of status is based on sort of nominal boundaries, so which municipality you lived in, stuff like this. So we thought this would be a good framework for the study. And there's also sort of this paradox I've sort of highlighted, that when Foucault looks at IT systems, she looks at it mainly from the West. So when you look at something like Google, it is actually not a state that regulates it, but in China it is a state that regulates an IT system. But can you still sort of use some of these ideas about decoupling and having a whole separate digital citizenship when you have such a state that sort of still is on top of a system? Yeah, so if we're looking at the everyday encounters of some of the authors who were in China, and then we have this one example here where two people oh, sorry, this is wrong one. Yeah. Where two people are traveling together, and then all of a sudden one of them gets this yellow code, meaning that the holiday is off, because they now, well, at least one of them can't go anywhere. The funny thing is that they all went together all day, but now they can't go anywhere because of this. So they need to find out what happened. And the reason it states when it changes is that they went to this hotel, which is a quarantine hotel, which they didn't go to. But they expect that maybe something happened with the mobile phone receiver or something. So it looks as if they were there. So they try to get it fixed. And this takes sort of all day. They start out by finding out which community they actually are in, which they didn't really know to start with. And then they found out and asked there, and then they get this message that, well, you might mistakenly have been given a code, but we don't know why, and we can't undo it. This is just something that can happen, and we don't understand it either, basically, is what they're saying. So you should find somewhere else. So they do try to find somewhere else, and then they go to different levels of the government. So they start with the city level, which is sort of the highest level, which says, yeah, well, it's actually the district level, which is sort of in between the community and the city, which can make this decision. So after having spent a full day on phone calls, they then call this place, and they say that they want to file a complaint, and they go back to the place where they started, and through there they file a complaint to the district, and then 1 second after the code is changed. But it's sort of something you need to go through, and finding all ways of working it through. Yeah, what we can sort of see is that even nobody really has an idea about what the app does, but they're sort of together with the citizens of trying to find ways of working around it when it does something that doesn't seem like what it should. But it allows them to have some degree of a hands-off approach if needed. If we then move on to the case of the village bank and the bank run that was happening in Henan, this was basically, it started with these village banks, which were intended to be sort of local financial institutions that should provide credits for local people. But they started out to become sort of web banks, having customers from all over China. And they also, I think, had some bad loans with sort of local needs. And then what happened was that they couldn't pay out the money when savers wanted to get their savings. They couldn't pay that. It said that the web page was down, and people started to travel to Henan because you couldn't get through the web bank that you thought you could. And they traveled there in great numbers, and then all of a sudden health codes started to change. So they were, even before leaving to Henan, some people had their health code changed to red, which meant they couldn't go anywhere, and they couldn't go and try and get their savings out. It all ended with quite big protests in Zhengzhou, in front of the People's Bank of China in Zhengzhou. And this was after the first time the health code had been changed, and it had been sort of publicly criticized that in People's Daily and places like this, that you shouldn't try to manipulate with this health code. Then it changed again here at this bigger demonstration, and it turned out in the end that that actually there was floated as beginning a solution to find out how to pay back these savings to savers, but starting with people from Henan. But it now seems that it's at least under some degree of control. So our conclusion sort of is that whatever trust there might be in the health code system, then it was maybe trusted because it was sort of supposed to be a neutral algorithm. So when people work around it, it's also because they think it did something it shouldn't do. It's clearly not accepted that you change the health code just because you want to prevent a bank run. So this was something that I at least have an idea that maybe it made the claims of the savers easier in a way in the end, that the COVID-19 codes have been changed. There are also bank runs in other places of China where something similar hasn't happened. But it was a challenge to work around these different ways of changing health code when something happened that wasn't supposed to happen with the health code. It's a challenge to both sort of local bureaucrats and to citizens. And when you work around it, then it is still sort of the kind of Chinese bureaucratic state that you know already, which is at work. So it is not completely deterritorializing things. It is sort of still the same logic that goes back very fast when you get out of the very specific realm of the health code. So that's sort of saying that's it's a question of how much will these new apps really change things? Will they just be around that you can use sometimes and then you go back to what you have? Will it just be another fragmented and the already fragmented structure, or will it actually be sort of something where you have a tougher government? So that would be the conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesper. I think last but not least, I think Dino will be joining us from Hong Kong via Zoom. Dino, can you hear us?
Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you.
All right. Yes, we can hear you. And maybe
Okay, I'll just share my screen. Should be able to see it.
Okay, yeah, we can see your PowerPoint now.
Okay. So I think we're running late, so I won't waste any time. So I think my talk is a bit different from just what I've listened to the other two panelists. I'm not going to tell stories because I've done that. I've done my fair share of intellectualizing pain. So I think my talk is not going to perpetrate sadness or rage. So in the sense that I think in the abstract already I told the story okay, if I could turn on the camera, forgot the, okay. So I think the abstract already told the story of a mishap of house code in Nanjing, where my mom was mistakenly given red code because passing through the lockdown on the train. Very similar to the story just told by Jesper, or people mistakenly given red codes and not being able to fix it and going through quarantines. And for me, it's really just in the past 2 years, and you live through multiple lockdowns, running away from quarantines, from different governing bodies, navigating a bestiality of house codes. There's many stories, but I won't tell these stories. But rather, I really want to think through the system of house code through Stiegler's more recent book, Automatic Society, and also the collection of his Nanjing lectures. So in this sense, this talk is not necessarily a critique of health code as a sort of, or a takedown of health code through as sort of suggested by the title of the panel, but more like a eulogy. And afterward, since the system is effectively dead. And also, I will not explain a lot of technicities of health code since my fellow panelists and have already done that. And I believe you already heard enough of that. So I won't go into the technical details. At the same time, while I'm trying to sort of think through Stiegler's idea, this is sort of not an academic essay, but an essay I've been working on. It's short sort of ruminations on Stiegler's ideas and especially in this particular context we're talking about, just like Jesper's mentioned that there is limitation of certain theories that are sort of conjured within the sort of finance capitalism or sort of typically Western style capitalism. In that context, it doesn't necessarily transfer to China. So in my case is that I try to think through Stiegler's ideas, but also I don't want to indulge in his system jargons. So basically, I try to explain these things in relatively simple terms. So first slide, so basically here what I'm referring to is what Stiegler calls traceology. When Stiegler talks about traceology, he's talking about, say, how Google traces your internet history, or in general, how Google, like the entire platform capitalism, traces user behaviors and provides you with targeted ads, etc. And also, in general, finance capitalism, and also what he calls market capitalism, etc. But in particular, what Stiegler talks about is this idea of capitalism become purely computational. This is sort of for Stiegler, this overcomes the aporia of capitalism as described by Protestant ethics in so therefore this capitalism as it manifests today becomes in capitalism this idea of becoming without future. And this is sort of the full realization of what Stiegler calls nihilism. And this is a particular, I guess, definition of nihilism in a Nietzschean sense. I quote, "The structural effort of full and generalized automatization is that capitalism becomes computerized nihilism, which seems to giving rise to a new form of totalitarianism." So in the sense that, of course, I'm fully aware that Stiegler in his books and the lectures were talking about finance capitalism, smartphone, digital marketing, neuromarketing, etc. He's talking about data society, and I would imagine maybe in French context, but also mostly European kind of context. And of course, a lot of his ideas are quite provocative in the sense that he uses terms such as de-society. He talks about the difference between knowledge and information, how the kind of how in this setup of where social autonomisms are suspended, or social autonomisms are set up where knowledge is replaced by information. But I think the idea can be utilized in the health code context as to think about the idea of algorithmic governance rather than not. So my role here is not necessarily to address capitalism in the sense in his kind of way. So for health code, especially if you really go to the intricacy of it, it's in combination of the travel code and variety of other things that, including the telecommunication system as a whole, it formulates a system of governance. And this is a bit of different, or maybe you would argue even radical difference from, say, say, a vaccine passport, which is very relatively just the interface rather than a whole system of governance that tracks everything you do. I mean, not necessarily everything, but at least in the case of health code, your physical movement. So in that sense, we can tentatively argue that this governance of health codes is purely computational. Of course, that when it makes mistakes, that's a different issue. We'll get to that. So in this sense, traceology is referring to a digital platform capitalism, or in China's case, a digital platform capitalism / state or state capitalism, tracing throughout hardware and software. But in this case, traceology is not, it extends to not just internet history, but also your physical movement, your vaccine passport, your body temperature, and other sort of information of your body. In that sense, of biopolitical governance in the most explicit sense. So in that sense, you look at the infrastructure of how the health code works. It's not just talking about health code, but of course you have to address the whole system, telecommunication, real name registration, apps, mini apps, state level software protocols, where you also province level, even city level, that you see all these different kinds of like hundreds of, if not maybe not 100, but many different kinds of health codes, how they're incompatible, etc. But at least in design, it tries to be comprehensive. So to simply speaking from a perspective, say, organizational research or techniques of governance, the system is almost perfect. In the sense, say, in Morozov's word, algorithmic regulation offers a good old technocratic utopia of politics without politics. Disagreement, conflicts under this model are seen as unfortunate byproduct of analog error to be solved through data collection, and not as inevitable results of economic or ideological conflicts. This is sort of I think also applies to think through how China applies ADM technologies to basically, in a sense, if you look at sort of a grander scale, instead of to think about, say, my own cases of mishaps of this kind of struggles, running away from quarantines, etc., that you can think through it as in a system that attempts to be perfect, in a sense of a pure computational utopia. That's where you have no more mishaps. You would have a perfectly neutral state and governance that judges you. I mean, obviously, it's not necessarily that's the reality, but in a sense, that's sort of the ideal. Then sort of comes in the idea of functional stability, and functional stability is not it's not Stiegler's idea that Stiegler borrowed from two organization studies researchers, Alvison and Spicer. So this idea of functional stability is, according to that definition, is the inability or unwillingness to use cognitive and reflexive capacities in anything other than narrow and circumspect ways. So in this sense, it would be implementing a system of health code, and in really explicit sense, obviously, of you have an army of health workers who then follow whatever the system shows, and unable to make a decision beyond the machine decision. So it's basically, to that sense, you get this a lot, say in the case of my, you maybe heard of many stories like this, just like my mom's story, where you, the health worker that you contact with is unable to change the decision made by the machine basically informed by the telecommunication system, whether it was intentional or mishap or however. So in that sense, if you think about it, it's designed that way. But this system doesn't mean it's not functional. It is functional to a large extent. Now we have seen after the lift of the lockdowns and when opening up of borders and waves of infections and death and everything, we realized that, of course, no matter how much you were against zero COVID, you realized it did work, that it did work insofar as containing the spread of virus, in combination of health codes and perpetual testing, etc. So in that sense, it was functional. And you could even ask, even in that sense, to that degree, the system has a degree of certainty, and that degree of certainty is why the system can sort of lasted, why it lasted. But also, as Stiegler argues, that the function of stability will also lead to other issues, especially coming out of this, say, lack of reflexivity, and especially in these ideas of how you attempt to control drives that are basically impossible to control. So in that sense, a totalizing system such as a health code will have a certain caveat that over time, and it did sort of explode. So, so for me, it's really to think back to these events, and also how effective, how functional zero COVID was, along with the systems. And we can think about this idea of course, at the beginning of, I think, I'm just going to keep track of time. Okay. So to think of through, say, biopolitical as a biopolitical regime, this of course is nothing new. I think that since the very beginning of the pandemic, Agamben was already very much talking about this, to be against mask wearing and quarantine, etc. And at the time, many people ridiculed Agamben for being a sort of basically imagining quarantines as the bunkers. So that sort of looking back, especially through the case of China, not necessarily in a European case, that maybe he was right in a sense. And I think maybe he deserves, I mean, that maybe many of us owes him an apology in that sense. But at the same time, you also, after the lockdown, the biopolitical regime quickly just goes straight to a necropolitical regime, in Mumbai's sense, where you just have seen bodies piling up in a really short period of time. So it's sort of the transition, and yet sort of in the last slide, obviously I think my thoughts has been sort of all over the place, but since it's sort of drafting ideas instead of presenting like a very organized research and with methods, etc. I hope my reflection has been helpful in that sense. So in the last slide, what I'm really trying to get is this what Stiegler calls society of hypercontrol. But of course, that's borrows from Deleuze's idea of societies of control. But and this society of hypercontrol for Stiegler is based on mobile devices, founded on mobile devices such as smartphone. And this, of course, applies in particular to China, where you can't live without smartphone. It doesn't matter what kind of background you're from, you can't. Basically, it's impossible to survive without a smartphone in all aspects of life, which I won't get into the detail. So in that sense, we can sort of, through the case of house code, even though now it is effectively dead, we can think through a techno-pharmacology where this, of course, pharmacology comes from the pharmaca, which is the idea of a medium that is simultaneously poisonous and therapeutic. So this, of course, that you can think is through house code very explicitly because it's house code. So it's supposed to be therapeutic. It's supposed to protect you from disease, but it can also be poisonous in a sense that would not necessarily you get infected by the virus, but you get afflicted by other things as a result of your red code. I think I'll just end the presentation there. I think we're running late, so I don't want to take too much of time. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dino. Indeed, we are running a little late, but because we started late, can we just have a very quick collection of questions or comments? Yes. Over there, we have one question. Over there. Yeah.
Hi, this is both for Dino and Jesper, and regarding the mistake of the algorithm, because I was in Xinjiang when it was 2021, so it was not in a harsh lockdown. I was traveling there, and apparently there was one active case, and then that was thousands away from me, but then I got the yellow codes, and then it depends on different service providers. My one apparently think I'm yellow code. My friends think he's a green code. We went in the same car. So I think that can be seen as a genuine algorithm mistake, as in the technician who did the math and planned it, decide where they think I am. But then the other one with the Henan, the justification, yes, it's a mistake, but there's like 200 people arrested. So we were assuming it's not a genuine mistake, but a deliberate mistake. But that was all happened under COVID period. So there was a very strict regulation, and everyone absolutely has to use the health code. But in terms of scale, not even China's lifted all the restrictions. I wonder if ever that kind of automated decision-making scale would ever reach to like every single individual and citizen in terms of governance and the regulation.
All right, so mistakes and mishaps at the larger scale. Let's just go around the room, collect all the, Terry first, and then Marianne. Terry first, behind, yeah.
Thank you, Terry Flew. I guess I sometimes worry, I'll do a bit of worrying out loud about the indeterminacy of the question of the power of algorithms. And I want to give a sense that I feel that we've been here before. That on the one hand, we get accounts, and the Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, would be a good example of this, where all powerful algorithms are able to steer subjects to, you know, all sorts of nefarious things. At the same time, we get a kind of counter narrative, which has its antecedents in active audience theory, where we say, well, you know, people are able to resist the power of algorithms, and they're not easily manipulated by algorithms. We also get the quite considerable evidence that if we look at, for example, targeted advertising through platforms, it's poor. By virtually any measure, a claim that targeted advertising through platforms operates more effectively than, say, slots on television programs is contestable. So do we find ourselves in a position a bit like we found with mass communications theory, where on the one hand, we get these theories of, you know, the dominant ideology now expressing itself in the form of the all-powerful algorithm? Or do we get theories of the resistant subject now being those who resist the algorithm, or we find that actually algorithmic targeting is not as good as we thought? So I'm just expressing some concern, I guess, that the power of algorithms has become a bit of a shorthand concept that when we try and explore what it actually is, that may be less clear-cut, and we may be actually rehearsing or rehashing some debates that have quite a long history in media and communication studies.
Thank you, Terry. So indeterminacies of the system, Marian.
Thank you to all the panelists. Just a very brief clarification question. You, from somebody who has not studied health code in any way whatsoever. So Jesper, you mentioned you called it the deterritorialized health code. And as far as I understand it, it's different. It was different companies behind health code design, like this app design and everything in different places. And I wonder how far, maybe also following up on what you said, and how far can we talk about like a deterritorialized health code if there's different companies like intentionally involved in this design, which maybe, I don't know if that could also be an explanation why in your case that you just described, your friends had a different result after you traveled together. I don't know. That's just a big clarification question.
Thank you, Marian. Is there any other question or comments? If no, then let's turn to the panelists. Maybe each one of you can have 1 or 2 minutes to respond. Starting from Sheng.
Yeah, I just want to comment on public response to algorithmic power, which could be really hard to characterize sometimes, and it's really really layered and complicated, and it's definitely does not just fit into like categories like acceptance or resistance, or can be captured by survey data. So by looking at popular discourses, at least, I think is very enlightening learning process for me, is that the users themselves might have feeling that they cannot put in words when it comes to algorithms and the algorithms impact in their life. And sometimes they will celebrate it. Sometimes they will maybe feel very apathetic towards it, but sometimes they do not intentionally talk about algorithms. And I think maybe a future direction for study is to really investigate how people consciously or unconsciously kind of think about or grapple with like algorithmic impact in their everyday life, and do not just hastily categorize them as like endorsing or resisting or something that sort of, this is something that sort of comes out of my piece too. So yeah, I just want to maybe add a bit of that. Yeah.
I stole the concept of deterritorialization from Sheng, so she would really want to answer. But I think it is maybe also closer to being reterritorialization, so a new logic that you have, because it is still happening within. I mean, I think the systems, but you know that better. They are becoming quite integrated in the health code, right? So the difference is more limited over time, at least. But still, it's all within the Chinese territory. And then normally, when you use the term deterritorialization, you're talking about something across national borders, and that doesn't go for that. And I think thank you for your examples. I don't have any real comments to them. I think they just show. I mean, we have qualified guesses about whether something is a problem in the algorithm or technical issue, or whether something is human manipulation, but we don't really know. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, Dino, do you have any response?
I think I don't have any of the questions were directed at me. So in my case, is that, for example, the question that dealing with the intricacy or the technical intricacies of algorithm governance, of how we talk about it, as in we don't address it in a sort of generic sense. Rather, we go into the. I would totally agree with that. So in my case, is that this is not, the presentation itself is not doing that, but in the sense that, but I would agree that this is the work that we need to be done, in the sense that we need to actually understand statistics, how it works, how this a lot of sense say this, for example, the telecommunication mishap, why is this happening? And what has been done about it, in a sense, not necessarily to fix the system, because, well, to reform the system, but if you think about the system and also this sort of ADM governance as a whole, in many cases, it's like plugging the hole in a leaking wall that you always you try to plug one hole, but there will be another leak soon. Then you try to, so you're constantly fixing it. It's always a continuous process. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it's just the way it is. So in that sense, I guess for the health code system, it also evolved in the past 2 years before it's basically gone. That it has evolved so many times. It has basically and it has evolved towards so many different directions, by different experiments, and locally, also nationally. There has always, before its end, there's multiple attempts try to nationalize health code, to basically use one system nationally, but that hasn't happened until the very end. So basically that is also, of course, other things playing into it, just like I think it was Marianne mentioned that there are many companies behind these health code. I think that is also true. There's many elements of different kind of course, I would say a pharmaceutical capitalism that is behind this system, but not necessarily profiting from consumers, but the state. So I guess that's also part of it. Yeah, I think I'm not. Yeah, I'll just cut it there.
Thank you, Dino. In a strange way, this is our last panel, but it echoes actually from the very beginning when Professor Shindai was talking about failures. So it echoes all the way back, and also what Mark would call frictions. Okay, within the health code's authoritarianism. Even though the three studies tackled it from different angles, but they all show how supposedly monolithic mechanisms of social control are not working, okay, are being repurposed, by different people in different ways, no matter, it's in the train station of Nanjing, or in the villages of Henan, or in Xiaohongshu. So I think this is very interesting way to, when we say why we study China, okay, in the global context, one easy answer is because it's authoritarian. But here we can see that's actually only a beginning to see how the supposedly authoritarian system can actually have so many different indeterminacies, unintended consequences. And also another, thing I have to tell this story, to spice up your lunch, right? It's because Shenzhou showed the picture of the Zhongkui. Right? So another way we need China to be in the global discussion, because China has its own historical intertextualities. Zhongkui, for those of you who are not familiar, is the typical ordinary households. Like if you see the big houses in China, they have two lions, right? But Zhongkui is like for poor people, they just put the painting of this hideous looking guy with the big beard. Here's a Taoist figure, right? And health code is supposed to be the digital Zhongkui, right? To safeguard the households, to safeguard our health. But then there are many origins to Taoism is a very chaotic system. But one of the stories, you said Zhongkui was actually a real person who tried to go to the imperial tests to become a military leader in Tang Dynasty. But because he looks too ugly, he failed the imperial test. And then he committed suicide and became a ghost. And he turned up in the dream of Tang Xuanzong. Okay, yesterday after Professor Zeuthen Zhao's discussion will tell there are different kinds of authoritarian emperors. Tang Xuanzong had a dream of his empress, one of the four beauties in Chinese history called Yang Guifei. Okay, and there was a little ghost stealing Yang Guifei's hearse. And then their hideous-looking guy came out and killed the ghost and returned the purse to his loved one. And then the next day, they made a painting of the Zhongkui, but then this Zhongkui was really become popular, okay, by the ordinary folks. And Chang Xuanzong, this emperor, actually at the end of the day, you know, he had to kill Yang Guifei in real person, okay, under the pressure of the bureaucracy. Right. So I think this Zhongkui has, at least this version of the Zhongkui actually can show in a very unique way to show how authoritarianism can embed itself bottom-up way of indeterminate narratives, okay, and even power structures, you know, celebrated by the everyday people in China and in the global South. So with this, I would like to just end with a very important announcement. Malavika is looking at me because last time I stood here, I forgot to make an important announcement about the Chinese internet in the global South, which will be the theme for this year's Chinese Internet Research Conference to be held in mid-July by Digital Asia Hub. So Malavika and Dev, you have seen many times on the screen, will be the main host. It will be in Chiang Mai. The deadline for submission is the end of this month. And I already put the links into our WeChat group. So just want to announce that so we can continue to talk about the indeterminacies when the imperial, when the colonial structures are being reappropriated, okay, in contexts such as Southeast Asia and the global South. So thank you, everyone, the panelists. Let's put our hands together.